are listening to Regeneration Rising, a podcast from Quivira Coalition's new agrarian program that provides information and inspiration to agrarians beginning their journey in regenerative agriculture. Each episode will explore what it means to work in regenerative agriculture, how people come to choose this as their livelihood, and why it's important to them and our future. We hope this podcast provides a foundation of knowledge for future agrarians and land stewards so they can rise up and focus on a regenerative approach to community, relationships, and the land.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Regeneration Rising. I'm Taylor Mulia, and before we get started with today's interview, I'd just like to share some news here at the Quivira Coalition. So we've just opened applications for the Regenerative Ag Fellowship in its second season. This is a program designed to reach more people than our flagship apprenticeship program. So if you have secured a job on a farm or ranch in anywhere across the United States, preferably the West, and it does not have to be a regenerative farm or ranch, but any operation, and you're looking to plug into education, resources, and community, just like the apprenticeship provides, consider this fellowship. It's a great way to deepen your learning and connect with other people that are going through a similar experience. So the whole program is really supportive. There's like check-in calls with the cohort. There are Zoom calls that are educational. There's a stipend to go, enhance your learning. And then everyone gets together at the Regenerate conference in November, and you get to see each other all in person. So if this sounds fun to you, if you have any questions, you can just go to our website. It's quiviracoalition.org/newagrarian/fellowship. And don't forget, applications close on March 15th. So please reach out to us if you have any questions as well. On to today's interview. My guest, I'm so delighted to introduce Jarvisson King. He is the owner-operator of Laughing Goat Gardens in Sanders, Arizona. And Jarvisson and I met on the contract grazing webinar we actually did with the Grazing School of the West. I saw that he commented about wool pellets and was instantly intrigued. I love sheep and have raised sheep and have seen how much waste wool just goes to the landfill. And it always strikes me that there's so much nutrition locked in wool, especially waste wool. Just I'm such a soil health nerd. So it's really cool to me that somebody actually has gone through the process of pelletizing wool and then using it as a soil amendment. So we got to talking, and little did I know, his life unfolded so beautifully in this interview. So you can kind of see his journey in agriculture, and so much more to the story than wool pellets. So I'm so glad that I was able to do this interview with Jarvisson, and so glad you have tuned in as well. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy. Jarvisson, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Let's kind of get started with a little bit of your background. Tell us about your interest in regenerative agriculture, where that started.
I can say I was kind of born into having livestock. My family's always had livestock. I guess it got passed on from my grandparents and their grandparents, so on, just on down the line. The Navajo tradition of keeping that livestock within a family alive and keeping it going. When I graduated high school, went out, traveled, did all the employment stuff for myself, lived my life a little bit. About 2011, 12, I got into more of being healthy, eating healthy food. I got into a group of friends that were really into the health aspect of life, eating clean food, which meant going organic and, reading ingredient labels on products that were on the shelf, which I kind of found weird doing when I first did it. I was, reading through the labels and reading the nutrition labels and all that. And it just kind of I feel like everybody's looking at you and looking at you weird. You just kind of have that sense, even though you were the only one in that aisle. And it just, but as time grew on, it did more and more. You start to understand, you start to do your research of healthy, clean food that you want to eat, and foods that are fulfilling to your body, taking care of your body. So from that point on, I just started looking more into shopping a little bit more local, learning about farmers markets. Just at that point, I was living in Phoenix and I was working in Phoenix, and it just kind of grew from there. A couple of years later, 2014, my mom became ill, so I came back home. I was supposed to only come home for about a month to 3 months the most, and a month came by, and that went into 2 months, 3 months, and pretty soon, I was like, wow, I think I'm just going to stay here indefinitely. And at that point, I had to decide either drive every week an hour in every direction to get to the closest grocery store that we have here, or find a different way of eating again. Because at that point, my mom was still I had kind of slowly transitioned my mom into my type of eating, but she was still eating like canned food, which stores longer where we are, versus fresh produce and all that. So, and the fall came, and my aunt in New Mexico was actually having a harvest festival. It was like, oh, that's so cool. Like my mom wanted to go, my uncle wanted to go. So we all just packed up and went out there, spent the day with my aunt, my cousins, and it was a fun day. And I think that moment, it really dawned on me that this is something that I can do, that I should do, and kind of just do it for myself so that I have access to fresh produce that I have grown, and also fresh produce from my mom as well. So in the beginning, 2015, my first growing season, I grew 2 gardens, smaller. I mean, they were like 20 feet by 50 feet gardens. That first year, I just grew our traditional Navajo foods: corn, cantaloupe, watermelon, some squash. And also I added on there what I love to eat, which was carrots, spinach, kale. I mean, those were my favorite at the time. And, nothing beats a fresh carrot right out of the ground. So, and from then on, it just kind of grew, and summer came. At that point, I started reading, and it just kind of propelled me into learning about soil health. That year, I found The Market Gardener, which was written by J.M. Fortier. And that really propelled me to think about soil health, because his whole thing is based on soil health, minimal disturbance, and all that. And I just like, this is going to be something that I have to do here. And I just kind of followed his steps. And that was the first book I ever read on gardening, which really I took on the whole market gardening aspect of laying out my beds and taking care of my beds, which, was totally different than the traditional Navajo style of gardening or farming. And my mom and I would always have conversations about that, because she grew up, traditional agriculture, the Navajo traditional way, where you basically the same as modern agriculture. You clear a field, and then you sow your seeds, and you take care of it, weed and everything like that. So pretty similar. But for the market gardening side, I would tell her, like, it's not really done that way. You kind of do it this way. You do your beds, you have a pathway, and you have set sizes, and you have set times: cold weather crops, warm weather crops, and spring, summer, fall. You could even overwinter, and just explaining things to her, how she had grown up to how people are doing it now, and they're really progressive with it, and it's evolving. And she was just surprised by it, and like, wow, that's really cool. And she would always do the comparisons. And I honestly think that I know that she was like my biggest supporter in all of this with the gardening thing. And she always loved it. And, we would spend time in the garden, sit near the garden, and trade stories about long times ago. Like with her, she would tell stories of when she was younger, and how her grandparents and how her uncles and people that lived in the area would tend to the gardens and all that, and how they would share, and at the end of harvesting, help one another harvest crops, and the stories like that, which was really interesting to me. But So
Yeah.
that's what really propelled me into the whole regenerative ag part of it, is like soil health,
Mm.
because where we live, our soil is just like super sand. It's just like 100% sand, I think. 2015, that end of that year, I tried my first cover crop. It was just a single cover crop, winter rye. And winter is when I do more of my reading. So I got more reading material and started learning more about cover crops and soil health, and learned that using a blend is a little bit better. So, you start learning more about cover crops, different types of cover crops. And from then on, the following year, I went to a 3 blend cover crop. And from the following year, I think I went to like an 8 blend. And then pretty soon I was doing spring cover crop, summer cover crop, fall cover crop, so that it can overwinter and then regrow in the spring. So, and from that second year, I have clovers from that one that I didn't pull out, or I didn't kill. They're still here. They went to seed, they spread seeds, and they're like probably 9 generations native now. So I just call them like my native clovers, and they usually gather at the
Yeah.
edge of the garden every year. They come back every year. I mean, it's pretty fun, and I love that they come back every year, and that's telling me that they're fixing the nitrogen, because they're a legume, so they're fixing the nitrogen in my soil. And nitrogen is something that my soil really needed, and I just find that it's like really interesting. So, I mean, that's how I got started on it.
It sounds like there's so many reasons why you're interested in this. Like there's a sort of a generational, like traditional reason, and then there's sort of like that the new, as you call, like progressive style of like market gardening, and like how deep you can get down that rabbit hole with like cover crops and all these different ways to boost soil health. And then you've got like on top of that, just your interest in eating healthy. So, yeah, is there anything else that sort of while you were gardening, you felt like it was like lighting that fire? Like, why to you did this matter? What sort of pulled you in?
Knowing that how my food is growing, and knowing that there's no pesticides, there's no herbicides, and knowing what goes into my food, what goes into my soil, and I'm building healthy soil that's producing a healthy food that I eat, and I know how it's grown, I know what went into the soil to grow that, versus something at the grocery store that I have no idea how it was grown. I have no idea what was sprayed on it, what went into the soil, what type of fertilizer went into the soil. Most likely some kind of chemical fertilizer to just make that, you know, plant produce fruit, which, from my research, is what chemical fertilizers do. They don't really build soil health. They just, you know, feed the plant to produce the fruit. So that was one big thing. The other one, I think, was like around the second or third year, when I realized that this is something that I really enjoy doing, and taking care of the land and feeding myself and my mom, and whatever's left over, I distribute to my family members, my sisters, my brothers. But for me, I think right around that time, like the second, third year, it occurred to me that this is something that I really want to do. I want to keep doing. So I set a goal for myself, and I just told myself, in the near future, I want to be able to feed myself, my family, at least have everything that I'm eating, at least 95% of it will be grown on this land. And that way I know exactly what I'm eating, how it was raised, and how it was processed. And, we're ingesting that, and we know it's healthy food, and that's going to in turn make us healthy. For example, last year, about midsummer, we had processed a cow, and we processed some animals, and we were harvesting zucchinis and beans and other things like that. And for lunch, I had, it was during the weekend, we prepared, like, I believe, like a little piece of a steak, and then we had the squash and green beans as sides. And, you prepare something like that, and you don't realize what's happening, and you just eat it. And that's when I kind of like, it kind of hit my head, like, you know what? This is really interesting, because 9 years ago, I had told myself that everything I eat is going to be, or my plate is going to be 95% of what I had grown on this land, and I want to do that. And at that point, like that moment, it just kind of in my brain, it just like fireworks going off. Like, wow, I did it. I mean, this is amazing.
Oh,
So,
wow.
it's just
Wow.
yeah, it was just like celebration. And I was, telling my girlfriend at the time, my fiance now, that this is what I had envisioned about 9 years ago. And I have it written down in one of my books where it was one of my goals that I wanted to accomplish. So it's amazing. I mean, you go back. I don't know. I write a lot. I write journals and I write down what I want to do every year, down to a month and everything like that. And sometimes I go back and I think, like, wow, this is what I wanted. Where am I? Am I on track? So it was like one of those things. I had to go back and find that journal, and it's like, and it was there. It's like I want to, grow 95% of what I eat in the future. I didn't have a deadline on it. It just said future, and it was at that point I was like, wow, this is so cool.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm glad that you celebrated that. Sometimes it's hard to really look back and see how far you've come. And it's cool that you have actual journal entries that you can track that progress. I know that similar feeling of like looking at your plate and realizing, holy crap, besides salt, I think I grew everything here.
Right.
I grew up very removed from where my food in Phoenix actually. Yeah, very removed from where my food came from too. So I think that is something that you have to celebrate. You have to stop and recognize that every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. I mean, that's what keeps you going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it seems like you give a lot of intentionality to your life. Like you have a lot of goals, very specific things that you want to accomplish. That's very cool. I think, yeah, where did you get that from? Did your family do that or is it something that you kind of just developed on your own?
A lot of the things that are instilled in me, I'd say at least 80% of it came from my mom. She would always say, if you put your mind to something, that you will be able to accomplish it. But you have to put in the work in order to get there. You can't just think that you're going to do it. You have to use your hands, your feet. You have to use your entire body to get there. Put in the work. The labor, the work, and actually get to where you want to be in life or something that you want to do. You focus on that. You put in your work, and once you get to the accomplishment, then it's something that you celebrate. So a lot of the things that she passed on to me, they were really intentional. So she always used to say, be intentional with your words and your thoughts. Don't just waste them. They're given to you for a reason. Your thoughts have power, your words have power, and don't waste them. If you're going to exhaust yourself on something, why use it on, non-intentional things? I honestly think that's where it probably comes from. So, when I focus on something and I say I want to do something, I at least give it a try. And she would always say that too, it's like there's nothing wrong with trying. Give it a try. If it doesn't work, try again. If that doesn't work, try again. Keep trying. And that was always her biggest thing. I think with that, I learned to enjoy the process of what I'm doing, because a lot of people, they focus, I think, more on the end game. That's like what they focus on, and they forget the process along the way, the little steps. I mean, the little steps is where you're able to make corrections and where you reflect as you're moving along. If this is working, you make adjustments. If this isn't working, you start making adjustments. So it's adjustments either way to get to where you want to go. And that's where, for me, I think at an early age, I learned how to write things down. And that was another big thing, a component of my mom in life, because for her, she didn't go to school. She didn't get an education in the school system because it was stripped away from her by her aunt who had raised her. It's a story of her that she used to say. At that time, we used to live out in the middle of nowhere, and they had boarding schools for Indian kids at the time. They came around, they were picking up young children of school age. They had come to her house. Her and one of her cousins they were getting picked up to go to school. But right then, her mom chased her out of the van and chased her after the sheep to go herd sheep. And that's always like a story of her saying that if I had gone to school, where would I be? And I always used to tell her, like, you probably would have been like the first female foundation president or something. She would have been a business owner, I always tell her, because the way her mind thinks, it's like business minded. Her mind really works, like an entrepreneur would, like a business owner. Like when I was a designer, just kind of selling t-shirts, designing t-shirts, and she's like, do this, do that. Nobody's going to know you exist unless you tell people about it. I mean, that was the marketing aspect of it. It's like, it's very simple words, but very powerful. It's like, if you don't market yourself, nobody's going to know you exist. And then you have to learn how to communicate to people, learn how to speak English properly, learn how to speak Navajo properly. You exist in two worlds, so you have to learn how to balance that. And for her, a lot of it was like balance, and then learning how to be really good at something, but still be humble enough to where your ego doesn't get a hold of you. So yeah, so I think a lot of it comes from her, and I appreciate a lot of that from her.
You're just hearing about the Navajo boarding schools. That is just wild. It's just so recent. Like, it's just hard to even, yeah, and it had such a huge, profound impact on your life and your entire community. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was like 100 years ago, at least, a little bit more than that. I mean, for other tribes, what is it, east of Arizona, that was like a little bit longer than that. Over 100 years. For us, it's like a lot newer because I guess the settlers didn't get here until later on. So yeah, but it just seems so recent if you think about it.
Yeah, so recent. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, like for my mom, my family, we actually moved from our original location after the long walk and moved further south into the mountains. And most of our family lived there, relatives. And, she tells stories about that. I mean, we're just so far from civilization, if you call it. I mean, to me, it's a trading post is a civilization. So, I mean, that's like 30 miles from where we are. And, you have access to all the essentials that you need for basic living. And it's like once a month, they would travel by wagon or horseback to go there to get their essentials, what they really needed. Other than that, it was just basically living off the land, still in their hunter-gatherer sense of mind frame, and that and the agricultural side of it. Yeah, it's so crazy how that works out, right?
Wow. And you were so lucky to have your mom so close to like be able to tell you these stories and share these experiences. It sounds like she was just so smart.
Yeah, I mean, it was always fun. I would ask her. That was another big proponent of hers. You have to ask about things. And I think from an early age, I would say when we're at the dinner table, she always say, if you want to know about something, you have to ask. Nobody's going to give it to you just willingly. You have to ask, questions. So I think that's what was instilled in me. My curiosity came from that. So I would always ask her, like, well, how did you guys grow up like this? How did you live like this? And, she would always go to its stories, like my cousins and I, or, my mom and my granduncle or somebody who did this and that. And, I would always go to her story. And at one point or another, my question would always link with her life and her childhood. And then it would go to a story of her experience and that. So it was always so fun, just hearing stories from her. So.
It sounds like the evolution of this story. So you're kind of getting interested in agriculture and you're really taking the opportunity to learn a lot from your mom. And unfortunately, you lost her in 2020, which I'm so sorry. It sounds like she was an incredible woman. I can't imagine the grief. Like, just so much was lost. Did you, how did you cope with that grief? How did you take that and push forward into something positive?
Yeah, that was really hard for me, difficult time. I think the way I coped with it and what kept me going was her teachings and what she used to say to me. It's like, from an early age, when my dad left, from that point on, it was her that molded me into who I am today. And I think that's where the training began. I was kind of think of it that way. You had to learn how to be a man, be a proper man. be a gentleman, learn how to work outside. So you have to learn how to do all these things on your own because now your dad's not here. Because she knows how to do it, but she just told me this is where I think I learned how to take instruction verbally as well. She just tells me how to do something. She wouldn't show me; she would just tell me, and I would just have to figure that out on my own. That's why I love figuring things out on my own. I think so. It's just like learn how to figure things out on your own. That's what you're told to do. So a lot of those teachings from her just kind of came back to me, and I just kind of thinking about it after the funeral and our traditional 4 days where we wash our hair and then we move forward. I had gone away from gardening that year. I had planted, but a lot of it just I didn't even bother with it because I was in the middle of the garden when I got the call that my mom was like her last moments, and yeah, that really just shook me. Every time I went into that garden, I always remembered that call, and it just that's what really killed my motivation that year for the gardening. The following year it was like, should I not? And just kind of debating it. Went out there and it just kind of felt the same. 2022, we planted a little bit, and I just kind of okay, we'll try to tend to it and see what happens. But last year I felt like this is the year that I'm going to get back into it. So it took a while to get back into the garden, and a lot of it, like on my TikTok, I always tell people that in the garden, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about life and death because each cycle of the season deals with life and death. Birth, growth, death. You harvest, and it's just like a cycle. So I kind of felt like that to me when I was doing that last year, and I think that's where a lot of it came from. And you just kind of in the garden, even when I was out with the herd, it just a lot of it just processing thoughts that come in, and sometimes thoughts of my mom would come, and I just break down out there, and it was crazy. And but yeah, so that's how I was able to cope with it, move forward, and just to basically I don't know, it's kind of hard to say, like, not really, I guess, kind of live with it. You have to experience the pain of grief and just like the loneliness and everything that happens. Just and for me, I just embraced it in order to get through it, process it, and be able to move forward from there.
I'm sure it was helpful too. I mean, the gardening seems, yeah, really difficult. And I almost wonder if it's, yeah, it sounds like it was that spot that was really sensitive and triggering, but it's also, I wonder if it's kind of like a stationary thing versus a walking thing, like being out with the sheep and the goats. But I find when you have something to think about or something to work through, like getting out there and building fences and walking and walking and walking and lifting and walking and walking is really you get a lot of thinking done. And it's just something about the walking aspect is very like generative, like stuff comes out of it, and it's really it's very healing.
Aside from the sheep herding, in the afternoon, I would take walks and go up to the ridge, walk on the ridge, and either that or I would, ride my bike, and just staying active was the biggest thing. And like my uncle always say, nothing happens on the couch. Get up, go do something. It's
Yep.
like, hey, that was true. So it's just like, why just kind of sit there and wallow in the grief and sadness, and go out there, walk, hike, bike, and let the dopamine take effect. So
Wow, but that must have still been really hard. But there was also some other pivot when you kind of discovered the wool pellet thing. So it sounds like you kind of got more interested in raising the sheep, and then yeah, tell us about wool pellets. This is like the most fascinating thing to me. Yeah, how did you hear about it? How'd you get started? What does it look like today?
wow, wool pellets, yeah. What is it, about 15 months now that we've been doing that? Near the near our corral, we got a bird patch. Bird patches. I noticed that they only come out where water gathers, or water kind of sits still a little bit more. So it's kind of like a little wash area where a lot of them came up. And we were doing something that day. We had to run an errand into town that we had to take care of. We let the sheep. I was like, oh, they'll be okay on their own. After we came back in the evening, I went to the corral to, pin them back up. Next thing I see, just like they're just tattered with all these birds. And I was like, what the heck do you guys do?
Oh, shoot.
You can't go in
Oh,
there.
no.
Yeah, they're just
Covered.
on the entire herd. I mean, they're just like hundreds of birds on them. And it's like, oh my God, it's crazy. Yeah. So the following year, 2023, we sheared, and yeah, there was no saving the wool or the mohair. It was just I tried one because there was a really nice one that our yearling ram that he had really beautiful wool. I was like, I can save this one. I can try it, trying to pull them out one at a time. But man, it took about 3 hours. And I only got to about half of it, just trying to take them off, wearing a leather glove so they don't prick me. And I just gave up on it and it's just like, okay, I don't even think we can sell this. So at that time, the previous year, I had went to a shearing school in Berlin, and I made some friends over there. Met some folks over there, and we kept in contact. And I told them what had happened with our herd, and it's like, oh no, that's not good, and that's crazy. That sucks. So she had mentioned wool pellets in that conversation. I just kind of started thinking about it, and I was like, what are wool pellets? And I, did some research on it and found Wild Valley Farms, and they were the ones that discovered the wool pellets in 2014. So it's like, wow, this is amazing. I guess we can do this. And I found some other smaller mills at that time that were doing wool pellets as well. And I just kind of got into reading it. And, it was a really interesting product. And I called her back. I was like, can you get me in touch with the lady that does the wool pellets? And she gave me information, left a voicemail for her, and she called me back, and we set a date to drop off the wool and have her make the wool pellets for us. And it just kind of started from there. September of 2023 was our first run of wool for wool pellets. I think from our own herd, we got about 150 pounds of wool pellets that year. And she's just like, yeah, this is a smaller amount. I can make it tonight. You can pick it up tomorrow. So we spent the night in Tucson, picked it up the next day. And I was just amazed at like how, I mean, I always show people that it's just like, it goes into shredder. After that, the shredded wool goes into the hopper, where the hopper has these 2 rollers or 3 rollers. We just go round and round, and it grinds the wool a little bit more, and then compresses it into the little die to get the pellet shape, and it just spits them out at the end. And it's just like, it's so fascinating how that works. And yeah, so that was our first run, and then that following month, October 2003, was our first farmers market show in Albuquerque, and we went there. And I think at the time we have pictures from then to now. Sometimes we just laugh about it, like, oh my God, we didn't even know what to take to a market, our first market. I think it's always like that. You're just so unprepared. We just had a stainless steel mixing bowl. We put the pellets in there as like a demo. And we didn't even have a table cover. We just had little cards and brochures about the farm.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, I was just more repeating what I had read about wool pellets, and telling people, soil amendment, and it contains nitrogen and this and that, and, how it works in the soil. So yeah, we kept doing that up to about spring. And then in springtime, we actually utilized it in our own garden. So we took the last summer off, and we worked the garden, and I saw how it works in my own garden, in my own soil, with the plants that we did, this seed starting directly in the ground, transplants, using it as a mulch, rototilling it in, and things like that, and just seeing the difference, because we had questions, because like every question I have, like I said, is like, I like to write things down. The questions we get, I write down. I was like, that would be interesting. Like, we can do a video of that. So a lot of things like that, like this year, I actually want to dedicate time in the garden with the wool pellets, answering those questions firsthand, like how to use them, how to implement them into the soil, and actually showing it being rototilled. I don't really rototill, but I'm just like I'm gonna have to break out my old tiller and then actually show a bed or two getting rototilled with the wool pellets, and just to show that it can be done that way, or you can just use it as a mulch. You can yeah. So all these different things that we get asked, but yeah, it's been a crazy journey, and I think honestly, I think after September, our home and garden show we did in Scottsdale, I I know I was more confident talking about wool pellets at that time because I used it. I used it in my garden. I seen what it can do, and I seen the benefits of it. And we also got it analyzed, so we have a guaranteed analysis of what nutrients are in our wool pellets, and you can find that on our website. So it has about 8.5% nitrogen, a little less than 1% phosphorus, potassium, and all the micronutrients like boron, copper. And this is one crazy thing: iron, magnesium, molybdenum, a little bit of calcium. And this is a crazy thing with wool pellets for me, as I was, you know, telling my story earlier about soil health and using cover crops and fertilizers. Ooh, I always get goosebumps when I tell the story, so I can feel now. But it's just so personal, and it's just so amazing that when I got my first soil test for my garden, all the nutrients that my soil was deficient in, after I looked at my wool pellets analysis report, all the nutrients that my garden soil were deficient in, the wool pellets
Oh my
had in
gosh.
them. And
Weird.
I was sitting there like, this can't be right. So I pulled up my first, like one of my soil tests, and I'm looking, comparing them side by side. And
Oh.
like, yeah, see, I'm getting chilled already. It's so awesome. I love this story. But, comparing them side by
Yeah.
side, and I'm like, nitrogen, 8.5%. And over here, it's like nitrogen deficient. And it's like, what
It's like
the
all
is
lining up
crazy? Phosphorus,
like a
potassium.
puzzle.
Yeah, especially the micronutrients. Oh
Wow.
my gosh. It's like copper, zinc, iron, boron. I'm just sitting there like, all this time I'm looking
Yeah.
out there for some kind of soil amendment to amend these nutrients. It's been right
Yeah.
here. And it just kind of like, my mind was just like,
That is so
what?
cool.
And just sitting
Yeah.
there, and
Wow.
my fiance came home, and I was like, this is so crazy. I got a story to
Yeah.
tell you. It's like, I got my report back, and it's just like, and I told her exactly like how they lined up, and it was just so amazing. I was just like, wow, yeah, it's just so incredible. It's like, that made me realize that you don't really have to look
Mm.
out there. It's like, kind of look what you have, and it's like, I guess, nature will provide somehow, one way or another. Our our sheep, ingest the plants that are here, and then they I guess they kind of recycle those nutrients into our soil to make them even out or something. And it's just like wow.
That is so cool.
So yeah, and I think that's the most amazing part of wool pellets for me. So I always tell people, it's like, I can't guarantee that these are the nutrients that you need in your soil. So if you have somebody that's pasture raising on native vegetation in your area, you know, get their wool pellets, because it's going to be more regional to you. So that's my story with wool pellets and the journey of it, and just like getting wowed by what nature is capable of doing.
So you can till them in, but you could put them on the top of the soil as a mulch. Do they kind of like they're pellets? They're not necessarily like alfalfa pellets where they're like really really smooth and they're. I'm just trying to think about like I'm trying to visualize. Do they sort of open up once they get wet? Like do they kind of become non pellets anymore once it rains on them?
They're similar to alfalfa pellets, not as smooth on the sides, not as big as well. I know alfalfa pellets are probably like as big as your pinky. I think they're like 12 millimeters. They use a bigger die for that. For the wool pellets, the ones we use, they're smaller. I think they're like 4 millimeter dies. So they're smaller. They're really, I guess, in shape and size, similar to wood pellets for like pellet stoves.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so they're really similar in shape and size. But wool pellets, they don't have that really shiny side on the cylindrical side. But they still kind of maintain the little fluffiness of the wool. So that's the difference of it. And yes, you can use it as a mulch. For us, I used it for my squash, for my peppers, watermelon, and tomatoes. It works like even under the soil and on top of the soil. Where when you use it as a mulch, you'll see it that you sprinkle the base of it of your plant, and once you water it, it might take a couple waterings sometimes to get like really like how I'm going to explain it. But when you water it, they'll expand and puff up, and then as it dries, they kind of shrink back down. Kind of like when you're wetting dog food, they puff up
Yeah,
and
totally.
kind of come back
Hmm.
down. Yeah, cool thing about the wool pellets I've noticed is that when they expand and they come back in, and then you water again, they'll expand a little bit more and come together. But they form this really tight layer around it where it just kind of they come together like so, and it just kind of blocks the wind from hitting the soil underneath and blocking the sunlight to hit the soil directly as well. So yeah, it protects it from the wind, from the sunlight, and it keeps that area around moist a lot longer. Not only that, but I've noticed that we had tomato hornworms come into our tomato plants after I used the wool pellets as a mulch. We didn't have any come by again, and we have a anthill, say about 15 feet from where tomatoes were. And it's so funny when you see them. I was like, I should have took a picture or video of this, but I didn't. I would always just see them. Like, that's so cool. And they would come, and then I don't know if it's the scent of the wool pellets or what, but about 8 inches from there, they would just go around in a circle around the plant, and then go again. And you could see that, and it's just like, wow, that's crazy. It's like I wonder if it's the scent of the wool that's causing it to do that,
Right.
or if they know that there's something there that's protecting that
Yeah.
plant. So it's just kind of weird how that works. So we know for sure that in our area, hornworms and one other one I'm not exactly sure, but for my squash in previous years, I've always had problem with squash bugs. Last year, I did a transplanting method too. Of like, you do your transplanting, you dig your hole, put a little bit of pellets on the bottom, put your root in, cover the root halfway, put a layer of pellets, cover it, and then put wool pellets on top as a mulch. So that was the method I used last year, and it worked really well for me. And I was like, it's zero. I tell this people this at the market, and they just kind of look at me like, really? Like, yeah, like no transplant shock
Huh.
whatsoever. It was just I was waiting all like a whole month after I did my transplant, like nothing happened. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I use it on fruit trees, peppers, squash, tomatoes, and all grapes. But for my squash, I have had squash bug problems before. Like using I don't know, I can't really credit it to the wool pellets, but I just want to say that it probably is from them. That, we only found one plant that had two squash bugs, and we caught them, removed them, and the rest of the season we didn't have any squash bugs. And I was like, it was kind of weird. I was like, I wonder if it's the wool pellets or if it's just one of those weird seasons where, there's really not many squash bugs. So I was like, I can't really say that it was the wool pellets until at least 3 years of consistency, and then I can say it is the wool pellets. So I just like kind of waited on that. But I just tell people that story about like, this is what happened this year. But I can't credit it to the world pellets just yet. I want to see if it does for two, like the second year and the third year. Then I can really say that it is the world pellets.
Yeah.
So, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's just amazing how it works.
I think that this is such an important topic. I'm excited to see more research coming out, more people trying and prototyping this kind of thing because, yeah, wool, I mean, we forgot to mention, but like local wool markets can be really amazing and lucrative. I think a lot of people that raise sheep with wool struggle to find a market for the wool and even struggle to find shearers to even, at least where I live, they struggle to even find shearers to come out. And so this is a cool way of repurposing, because I'll be honest, I've seen people bag up wool and give it to the landfill. It's just so hard to justify doing anything with it unless your whole business is around wool and you've got a market for it and you're passionate about it and you've got the right breed for it. This is so cool because you could use any breed of wool sheep. Like, you don't have to really fine tune the like softness or the, like the all those details about wool that make it really soft and usable. This is just amazing. Like, it's such a cool way of using wool and recycling those nutrients instead of just throwing them in the landfill.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like my aunt that I was telling you about that, we attended her harvest with.
Oh yeah.
She used to have, I mean, like probably 100 head of sheep, but since the wool prices at the time just crashed as well, she got rid of all her sheep. And even, when we used to visit her, she would say that people in her area, they just shear the sheep, they dump the wool, just somewhere, or take it to the trash, at the landfill, and they would try to burn it as well. And it's just like, it's so crazy. I'm just like, wow.
It's such good stuff. I mean, it's cool that you got an actual nutrient analysis, because I feel like anyone who's sheared sheep has felt like, oh my gosh, this stuff is just like good. There's a lot of good stuff in here. And especially the wool that would be considered total trash wool if it's got like hay and bunch of, debris jammed into it, impossible to clean. I feel like that's like the best wool pellet. You've got like a supercharged nitrogen pellet that's going to just get in there and start decomposing immediately. Yeah, it's taking the absolute worst pickings of the wool crop and making it into like the highest quality wool pellet.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the waste wool is the one that actually propel that into wool pellets. And like you mentioned, you'll get a little bit of manure, a little bit of vegetable matter in those type of wools that get skirted and put that into a wool pellet. You have the vegetable matter, then you have the manure, and you got the wool gets grinded up, and like you said, yeah, it's just like a supercharged little pellet there. It's like natural amendment, natural fertilizer, however you want to call it. I mean, it's all natural.
Very cool. Well, I've kept you for such a long time, so we're gonna wrap up with a couple more questions. I didn't want to leave before talking a little bit about your YouTube channel, which I adore. It's so cool to see, yeah, your landscape and what you're doing on your land, and so I highly recommend folks listening to this podcast, check out Jarvisson's YouTube channel. Yeah, tell us a little bit about why you love telling your story to other people and why you love using YouTube, and specifically, see you've got some videos on there in Navajo. So yeah, tell us about why you love that YouTube channel. What keeps you going with that?
I'd say just kind of sharing my knowledge, sharing stories of what I love to do. Yeah, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Laughing Goat G is our handle. So you can find us there. But for YouTube, I think is the one I actually first started in about 2018. I just kind of started messing with it. I originally started with Instagram. At the time, I just felt like I wasn't ready to talk to the camera. And I don't know if I still have my first 3 or 4 attempts of, walking and recording myself, but it just I felt like I was rushing when I talked, or I was trying to catch my breath and all these different things that I just feeling like this so insecure, like I can't post that, and I think I was just overly, I wanted it to be perfect. I think that's what it was. I was just being so picky that, I wanted it to be perfect, but I came to realize that, I can't make it perfect. Nothing is perfect. So that's why I think that even to now, I don't like editing my videos. I just do everything in one shot, hit the record button, and I just talk. If I mess up, and I kind of like joke about it, like, oh, I didn't mean that. But then, so, and it also saves me time in the end instead of cutting and editing. It took me like 2 years to get to the part to where I was comfortable with the video. And it was funny. I would always be in the garden or somewhere, and I would kind of, at first it was just all pictures, and then I, just kind of doing different angles, holding the camera, different things, and just getting comfortable with it. So yeah, I think that's how my YouTube came across. And built up to it. In 2020, one day I was herding sheep, just thinking, and I just thought of my mom and some of her teachings. And that was the first video I put on YouTube in Navajo, in the Navajo language, and just kind of what she would say to me. And I just was talking about that. And it kind of grew from there. And I just called it Navajo Tuesday. And I did, because the first one I did on a Tuesday. And then the following week I did on a Tuesday. And I kept doing it on Tuesdays for about 3 or 4 months, Um, and then I stopped for a bit and we started moving things around. And the funny thing is that on YouTube, it didn't really gain traction. On Instagram, it didn't really gain traction. And at the time, I think I was kind of dabbling with TikTok. And I remembered I had a video on YouTube and I just kind of cut it up, put it into little pieces, put it on TikTok, just for, just so like, let's see what happens. And oh my God, a week later, it just kind of grew over like 3,000 views. And I was sitting there like, this is crazy. And then I just went back, did a video in English, put it on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok just to kind of see how it works out. Instagram did really good with the English version. TikTok, it was like maybe 40 views, whatnot, 2 likes, 40 views, 50 views. Instagram was like a lot more, like 150 views and all that. And I was like, this is kind of weird. Waited a week, nothing's still the same. Like, all right. Took another portion of that video in the Navajo language, put it on TikTok and across all the platforms. Instagram, didn't do too well. And TikTok, I noticed about this time, about 4 or 5 days later, it just went to 5,000 views again and like 100 likes. I'm like, this is crazy. It's like, so that's what made me understand like kind of where my audience is. So from then on, I just started posting more Navajo language content on TikTok and English language content on Instagram instead of trying to go all across. But the crazy thing with that is like I have to do 2 videos English and Navajo if I'm talking about certain things. It was kind of fun figuring all that stuff out. It's just learning how to wear many hats as being an owner and a rancher of, a ranch that, you want to market and reach the people. And I think it's just because I like to share my knowledge with people, the knowledge that I had gained from working with soil, because like I told you, it's like I like to read in the winter, try to find material specific to my area. And it's really difficult to find materials specific to sandy soil or northeastern part of Arizona or this location. A lot of the books that I've read were Midwest, Eastern, Northwest California, and never Arizona or sandy soil. It's always loamy soil, really beautiful soil. It's just depleted of nutrients. It's like not really what I'm looking for. But there was one book I found that mentioned sandy soil, and it was a really cool read. But I think it's just mainly that, just telling people that, if you have this type of soil, these are what I found will work best, and just sharing that knowledge with people. So knowledge should be free. I mean, honestly, like my uncle says, what am I going to do with this knowledge after I'm gone? He's like, I'd rather share it with as many people as I can while I'm alive. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who maybe are, like we talked about this before, like there could be a young kid, Navajo kid out there that's like, wow, this is actually very relevant to my life, and this is something that I could pursue. And so that's pretty powerful. And I think too, it's also just amazing to nowadays at your fingertips get to hear the Navajo language. A lot of us have never even heard it before. So that's just very cool that you're able to share that.
I feel like there might be a young child out there that, overhears me speaking in the Navajo language, gets interested and wants to learn what I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about is gardening or shepherding, taking care of sheep and goats, taking care of the land, building up soil health. Maybe they wouldn't know what it is, but maybe this is my way of helping the younger generation get interested in soil health. And I believe that's why I kind of integrate my soil health, gardening, shepherding knowledge with traditional teaching and just interweaving them together along with stories of myself and stories with my mom. So it just kind of interweaving them together to make it a little bit more interesting and to draw from real world experience.
Very thankful that you're able to share all of that across all those platforms. Okay, we're going to finish up and do a rapid fire set of questions. So don't think about the answers too much. Just a little fun way to wrap up our episode. So complete this sentence. Being a beginning agrarian means, and that's, you're not a beginning agrarian, but you sort of started in your own way. What does that mean to you?
I guess healthy living, because a lot of the things just boils down to healthy living, healthy soil, healthy food, healthy animals, healthy people.
If you had a private chef to cook you any dish after a long day, what would it be?
Ooh, tacos. I love tacos.
What's one book on your bookshelf?
That I actually have, I think I touched on this subject earlier, a cool book that I have. It's called Quiet by Susan Cain, I think it was her name. It's called Quiet, The Power of Introvert for a World Can't Stop Talking. I think
Oh,
I just butchered that
yes,
title, but
yes, I've heard of that.
yeah,
hmm
yeah, it's such an amazing book. And yeah, I love it when I read it. It's just like, wow, I got to reread it again this year. So it always keeps me like thinking like, wow, this is amazing. So,
What's one musical artist I should listen to?
ooh, I'm listening to a lot of Evan Bartels these days.
What's a non-ag related hobby or interest of yours?
Mountain biking.
That's awesome. I also love mountain biking. Arizona is a great place to mountain bike.
Oh yeah, we have all this open range over here, and oh man, yeah, I love it. I haven't done it this year yet, but I'm just like I gotta get back into that. So
Okay, a nugget of advice for other beginning agrarians is
give it a try. I mean, you won't know that you're able to do it or you enjoy it unless you try. It's a quote from Rick Rubin I heard on one of his interviews. Like he said, don't say you can't do it. Say I haven't done it yet. So, I mean, that's to me that kind of resonates on how I feel. It's like the power of words. Don't say you can't do something. Just say you haven't done it yet. So give it a try. You won't know unless you try and embrace the process. That's all it is. It's like enjoying the process and learning from it and accomplishing something.
where can people find more information about you and your farm?
You can go to our website, laughinggoatgardens.com. You can learn more about our wool pellets. You can order our wool pellets, learn more. Well, actually, all of 80% of it is about our wool pellets right now. Getting some blogs written up to talk about our herd, pretty much our whole operation. Angora goats we raise for mohair and meat. Rambouillet merino, Debouillet sheep we raise for wool and meats. We raise cattle as well, but they're all pasture raised, pasture finished on native vegetation. So you can learn all about that on our website. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube at Laughing Goat G. That's our handle on all their social media platforms, Laughing Goat G. And if you're in Arizona or New Mexico, we attend farmers markets about once or twice a month, most times in Flagstaff, other times in Sholo. And we go to Phoenix markets. We'll actually be in Phoenix the 22nd of February at the Keep Phoenix Beautiful Community Garden. We'll be there, for that event. So you can find us there if you're in the Phoenix area. I think the best way is like Instagram, where I post a lot of our events and markets, and our website also has a events and markets calendar, so you can always see where we will be.
Jarvisson, I can't tell you how thankful I am for you coming on this podcast. Your story is so, so interesting and inspiring to me. Just thank you so much for your time and for all the wisdom that you share with us today.
Well, yeah, absolutely. This was fun. So I'm always excited to share my stories with people that are willing to listen and that have the same interests as me. So, I can talk soil health, gardening, wool, mohair, sheep, goats all day.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you very much for having me on here as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to connect to the broader Quivira community of ranchers, farmers, conservation and government agency professionals, educators, nature nerds, curious consumers, and more, we're excited to have you. Our website is quiviracoalition.org, and in the upper right, click on Get E-News to sign up for our newsletter, where we share happenings and events, learning opportunities, job postings, and more. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review and a rating. It really will help other people find us and maybe even find their next step in regenerative agriculture. Thanks so much, and see you next time.
This podcast was produced by Quivira Coalition in our quest to support resilience on working lands. Learn more about our work and how you can support regenerative agriculture and solutions to climate change at quiviracoalition.org. This episode was edited and engineered by Caleb Wenzel-Fisher. A Folk Story, our theme music, was made by Alex Cristoforetti, and we're grateful for our guests who take time out of their busy lives to share their experiences with us.